RFK is deciding on whether or not to drop out, and if so, who is he going to endorse? So this guy has been putting millions of dollars towards fundraising, and more specifically, Nicole Shanahan, her millions of dollars from Silicon Valley, has been funding access to the ballots of major swing states such as Michigan, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. Now, with that being said, we also have Pennsylvania in consideration. These people are apparently going to drop out, presumably pretty soon, as they see their campaign is pretty much dead, which I've been calling for months. But anyway, we've had some recent interview clips by Nicole Shanahan, the VP candidate for RFK, who was polling back in the day at like 19 percentage points and is now down to about 5. As you can see here, even less than 2 months ago, you saw that RFK, right before Biden dropped out, was at 12.3 percentage points. Now, all of a sudden, he's down to about 5. As you can see here, Harris has a lead right now of 1.5 percentage points on aggregate in the popular vote. You can see that Kennedy has a measly 4.5%, so not even 5. Stein, who is a Green Party person, very liberal, that's 1%. And then you have Cornel West, who is a melanated Bernie Sanders dollar store edition, and he's at less than 0.5% of the vote. I mean, the point being, though, is that Kennedy has been plummeting in support. Ever since Joe Biden has dropped out, it seems to be coalescing in that respect. Now, this gets to a bigger theory by me, and it's a very obvious thing. In fact, it's not even a theory at this point. But the truth is, and the bottom line is that Kennedy is confronted with the fact that he, right now, as it stands, is taking more votes from Donald Trump as a third-party candidate than he is from Harris, which might not be a problem if you take it at face value that RFK is somebody who is pretty liberal on almost everything. In fact, you would say easily 3/4 of his policies are liberal, and that he might have some skepticism about environmental things, or in particular when it comes to the virus that happened a few years ago and all that sort of thing. But when it comes down to it, again, he's mostly liberal, but it seems to indicate that by the fact that he's considering dropping out, that he's totally predisposed to actually becoming a Trump surrogate and endorsing him, which is really odd for a myriad of different reasons. As obviously I've already told you, he's very liberal on almost everything. His family is in that way, obviously, but it seems pretty clear that Donald Trump is open to positioning him, whether that be health secretary service or whatever cabinet position he wants, in exchange for an endorsement. Now, months ago, that would have meant a lot more. But truth is that while Kennedy, obviously, his support is down to less than 5%, the truth is 4.5% is actually a lot, depending on how you count it. So obviously, right now, we actually have some receipts as to why Kennedy takes more votes away from Trump than he does from Harris. And we're going to break that down now. So let's first address the direct quotes from the running mate, Nicole Shanahan. So as you can see here, indicated that Kennedy could leave the race amid concerns that his candidacy creates a disadvantage for Trump. Shanahan told the Los Angeles media company Impact Theory that the campaign could, in quotes, walk away right now and join forces with Donald Trump, according to Reuters. Also, Kennedy himself put on Twitter that he's willing to talk to any leaders of the political parties to further the goals that he's served for 40 years in his career and his campaign. Now, I bring this up to make a major point. Okay, Kennedy, in the way that he wrote that statement on Twitter, is to say not that, I want people to advance raising taxes on rich people, gay rights, and other standard Kamala Harris sort of talking points. Instead, you're saying, okay, I put in 40 years into like these niche, vaccine sort of things. And so Donald Trump might better serve that purpose than does Kamala Harris, who will by and large go along with whatever the establishment wants. And I think most people can tell. Another dog whistle by RFK in the most moderate of terms. You see this, end quote. These are reversing the chronic disease epidemic, okay, niche, ending the war machine, that's more of a Trump thing, cleaning corporate influence out of government and toxic pollution out of the environment, that's kind of neutral, protecting freedom of speech, and ending politicization of the enforcement agencies, he said. Okay, so you can see how the majority of these are probably more of a Trump campaign thing than is Harris. And so you can kind of read in between the lines of that. Now, out of about 2,000 people that were surveyed, the New York Times aggregate of polls suggests that actually Kennedy is siphoning support from Trump rather than Harris. In fact, in a two-way race, Harris leads Trump by about 2 percentage points, which would be, in this case, 49 to 47% in the average. Whereas with Kennedy included in these polls, he wins about 4% of the national support, and Harris's lead shrunk to a single point over Trump in the aggregate. So what does that even mean? Well, what it means is that actually Trump is losing anywhere from like, let's say 0.3% of the popular vote to like 1.2% because of Kennedy being in the race, because apparently more people are banking their vote with Kennedy that would vote for Trump otherwise if forced to pick out of the dichotomy than vice versa. So you can see there. Another huge indicator, by the way. An Emerson College poll found that most of Kennedy's voter would back Trump over Harris. In fact, when you look at this, about a two-way race, about 64% of Kennedy supporters say they would have backed Trump over Harris, while only 36% would obviously pick the vice president. A recent ActiVote poll similarly showed that Kennedy won slightly more Trump than Harris voters. In fact, in a poll conducted a few weeks ago among 1,000 likely voters, it found that about Trump lost 5.6% of his voters to Kennedy, whereas Harris lost 4.9% of her voters in a three-way race. So you can see how Trump is losing on the net 0.7 percentage points, and that Kennedy has 28% more Trump vote, if you know what I mean, over Harris vote. So you can see how Trump is actually losing support. So when Harris takes less of a hit by about 30 percentage points out of a aggregate support of Kennedy of about 5, you can see how you can reduce that 5% down by 25 or 30, and you can see how Trump is losing almost a net percentage point of the popular vote by Kennedy staying in the race. All right, so now that we know that Kennedy is right now openly pontificating and his surrogate VP is clearly even more obviously and probably to a lower IQ extent, just like plainly saying like, okay, we're not going to win, which is the whole name of the game of the grift, is to say like, okay, yeah, I know we're pulling at 5, but we totally have a chance. Let me waste your time and have you chase ballots for me, Kennedy supporters. Now, Nicole Shanahan is too dumb to keep up the charade for this long. And so she apparently has already given out the whole game that they actually probably want to endorse Donald Trump. And they're just waiting for Trump to kind of extend an overture in an olive branch and say, okay, I'll give you X and Y if you endorse me. Now that this seems to be the trajectory that we're following, I think Trump would actually oblige to this, as obviously winning the election at all is super important. And so whether or not you give a liberal guy some nominal support over being a cabinet secretary out of like 15 of them, I don't think Trump even cares. And so for that reason, I think that Trump would see this as a kosher deal. And so for that reason, I think that Kennedy's 4.5% of the national support would totally not completely help Donald Trump, by the way. 4.5 wouldn't magically go to Trump, not even close. What you would see is that Harris would gain some and Trump would gain more. But a lot of those Kennedy supporters would just not vote, for the record. And so I think Trump would actually gain maybe anywhere from like, let's say 0.5% of the popular vote to like 1%, which is a huge deal. You might say, well, Trump is down by more than 1, so how the hell is it a big deal? Well, to be clear, Donald Trump beat Hillary despite losing the popular vote by over 2 percentage points. And so for that reason, you can see that Harris winning by less than 2 is not indicative of a victory when it comes down to it, for very obvious reasons. Again, when you add a percent of the popular vote to Donald Trump because of Kennedy, you're not just adding it to the popular vote, which is inconsequential to the actual election. It comes down to the swing states. You add a percent to Trump in 2020, he would have won the election. And so that's a very big deal. Now, to elaborate further, why is Trump losing support from Kennedy relative to Harris as compared to when Biden was the nominee, that actually Biden was losing Democrat voters to the third party, in which case Trump benefited by the exclusion of Democrats voting for Biden? The reason why that was even the case to begin with is because there was a niche amount of voters in general that would have voted for Biden in 2020, but in 2024 saw him as too senile to run again. And so obviously in 2020, you saw that about 50% of people in the exit polls, and that by that I mean like people that were surveyed after the election, said that actually Joe Biden was too old to be president. And by too old, they meant like having dementia and whatever else. And so that was 50% of people 4 years ago. God forbid you were to poll them now, you would see that about 70 or so percent of people would say, actually, you know what, Joe, you are too old. Like, you are clearly out of it. And after the debate performance, golly, I mean, I would say 90% of people that actually had a pulse would probably also agree with that notion, which is to say, obviously, that Joe Biden was in a position to where there was a few percentage of people, as indicated by this. Again, Kennedy at 12.3% when Biden was the nominee versus now he's at like 4.5. Again, there were several percentage points at Democrats that said, okay, look, I support Democrat policies over Republican ones, and Trump is crazy, but I cannot in good conscience vote for a guy like Biden who clearly is not capable of being president. Now, that doesn't mean that Kennedy would have ended up with like 20% of the popular vote come November, but what it would have meant is that he'd definitely be like, let's say at 10, and at least there you'd have more of a notion of like, okay, you're significant in history, but also it would have meant that those people that supported him in polls but didn't show up on election day would have totally at least not voted for Democrats, and there would have been a big sting. But because Harris is the nominee, those Democrats that were, ideologically very liberal, but also saw Biden for what he was and the lack of a mind that he had at that point as a nominee, those people came back to Harris and said, okay, well, I mean, at least she, while, obviously pretty dumb in my opinion, is still probably more capable of stringing along a sentence, cackling included, than is Joe Biden at this point. And so that's why Harris has been actually capitalizing on Kennedy staying in the race. Well, his support atrophies. It's mainly not because he sucks. I agree with that, but it's because the Democrats that were supporting him because Joe was too old are now coming back to the Kamala HQ. Again, this is more so an RFK analysis. So a lot of people that casually watch the show will say, oh my God, talk about the general. Look, I want to get into the niche of this. My biggest video, by the way, I think is about RFK. So we're going to beat this little thing into the ground, okay? We're going to smoke the cigarette until it burns my fingers around it, okay? I'm not ashing it. No, we're going all the way in. Like the video if you want to know more. But listen, this Nicole Shanahan interview is super, I wouldn't say inspirational, but super interesting. Look at this. So Nicole says there's two options that we're looking at. One is staying in and forming a new party, but we run the risk of Kamala Harris and Walz's presidency because we draw voters from Trump, or we draw somehow more votes from Trump, or we walk right now and actually we join forces with Donald Trump. That's more or less me paraphrasing what she said. Now, this is interesting. The way that she worded it, it seems like there's a consensus between the two of these guys, Nicole and RFK, that they don't want Harris and Walz to win. But above this is that they're noticing that they're taking votes away from the Republicans, whereas obviously a few months ago, like I said, and they probably knew this more than me even, and I'm smart, but that they knew that they were taking votes from Biden and they were completely fine with it. But now it's like, okay, well, we actually do not want the Democrats to win in this case. And so if that's the circumstance, then they want to support Trump more outwardly. Now, this is another kill shot. She added right here. That she and Kennedy may stay in the race to gain about 5% of the vote and form an independent party, which would allow them to get access to public funding. Right now, they're in serious jeopardy. Their support base is about 4.5% as of right now. So they're not even at the 5% prerequisite to get public funding. Again, tens of millions of dollars for a third-party candidate is way bigger than it is for Trump or for Harris. In fact, it would be the equivalent of losing out on hundreds of millions of dollars for either candidate at the blue or red camp, which is to say that for them to be in contention to even get the 5% means that they have much less leverage than they anticipated in the first place. The RFK trajectory as of a few months ago, or maybe 6 months ago, was that he was actually bigger than Ross Perot electorally, and that in fact he was about to get about 20 percentage points of the popular vote in the case where Biden would have stayed the nominee and he would have been crumbling, and then Trump obviously has his high floor below ceiling, and then you've got the people over here with Kennedy where he would have gotten public access funding, which is again tens of millions of dollars, but also he would have had ballot access in all 50 states. So he would have had his chances of winning the presidency would have gone from like 0% to like 0.1%. But now they're back to zero because again, he's only in 19 states. And so obviously he's become nothing more than a thorn on the side of Donald Trump right now. And so they're weighing, okay, well, what side are we going to pick? Now, here's another key indicator. The Washington Post last week reported that Kennedy had reached out to the Harris campaign with an offer to endorse her in exchange for a position in the cabinet. So what that proves is that, assuming that's a true story, which I don't know why they just make that up, what it proves is that Kennedy has been shopping around the endorsement, and the Harris people do not want Kennedy in because they view him as like a conspiracy nut. And if that's the case, then they're saying, okay, well, you take votes away from Trump, so you're helping us. So why the hell would we have you drop out when that necessarily wouldn't really even help us by that much in an election that they think they're winning, and they're all coconut pilled and insane and bonkers like Tom Hanks in Castaway? Much less when you look at it, okay, you notice that obviously, again, in the calculus, Harris says, okay, you're helping me by staying out there, and why the hell would I help you at all to get you some position in the cabinet when I could pick somebody who's more loyal to me? And so I can see why Harris would have rebuffed that, but unfortunately for them is that this offer was pretty good to give Kennedy a token nomination into the cabinet, when in reality, now he very well may actually endorse Donald Trump and help Trump's election odds by a good amount. Here's why I say that Harris may regret her decision, allegedly, to rebuff the endorsement of RFK. So as you can see here, Trump is leading Harris by only 0.2 percentage points in the state of Arizona, where I live right now. So if you were to add the five-way candidacy, you'll notice that all of a sudden Harris goes up to 0.6. So she's actually winning the state if you put Kennedy in the poll. Now, this is why Kennedy might seem like, okay, he has better leverage now than he did before, believe it or not. And he might actually help Trump flip states that were otherwise untenable because, again, he has this like niche support base that otherwise would have supported Trump against Biden. But now, because Harris is the Democrat, all of his liberal base is fleeing over to that side. And so now there's these like Klingons of the COVID era that need to come back to Trump, that Trump needs. And so Kennedy is cognizant of this fact. And so if Trump offers him anything in the cabinet, I think he'd take it. So as you can see here, according to these polls, disagree or not, it seems that right now like Kennedy is spoiling the election for Trump in Arizona. No, these numbers are crazy. In Wisconsin, Harris is leading Trump apparently by 1 point. If you add Kennedy into the calculus and the other two, Stein and West, you'll notice that Harris increases her lead by 0.7%, which is a big deal when you're talking about only being up by 1. You add 0.7, that's like a 35% difference overall. And so for that reason, again, Kennedy's endorsement might actually be critical in this case. And so again, Kennedy might seem like, okay, this is the Hail Mary to get into the health and human services department or whatever it is. Again, real quick, a tour across the swing states. Harris is leading Trump 1v1 in Michigan by 2.4 percentage points. You look at Kennedy in the sampling, and then all of a sudden Harris's lead goes up by 0.4 percentage points. And as you can see, Kennedy is polling nationally at 4.5. In Michigan, he's at about 6. And so you can see here how Kennedy is actually costing Trump right now in the swing states that are important. Again, Trump won Michigan in 2016 by about only 10,000 votes. And so for there to be a 0.4 percentage difference in the vote share is actually bigger than what Trump won Michigan by in the first place in 16. So Trump could himself see this as a really big reason as to why he should receive the endorsement of Kennedy and help him out. Because as you can see here, again, in Pennsylvania, the biggest swing state, you'll notice that Harris is up by 2 in a 5-way election with Kennedy on the ballot. You look at a 1v1 and Trump is beating Harris by 0.2 in Pennsylvania. So that's interesting. Well, what that basically means for you guys is that apparently Kennedy is costing Trump by 2 percentage points in the popular vote in Pennsylvania. That is freaking insane. Assuming that's even true halfway, to be costing a candidate in the biggest swing state 2 percentage points is gigantic. And so for that reason, again, Kennedy would be really well served to use that leverage in the state of Pennsylvania. North Carolina, you'll notice, again, 1v1. Trump is leading Harris by 1.2, about the margin he won that against Biden in 2020. You'll notice that when you put Kennedy on the ballot, all of a sudden it's a tie. If Trump loses North Carolina, he loses the election, I promise. So this is a huge deal when you really break it down. Now, again, Georgia, Trump is leading by 1.7 percentage points with Kennedy on the ballot. In a 2-way against Harris, Trump is leading by only 1. And so Georgia seems to be the only swing state that actually is benefiting from Kennedy being on the ballot. So out of the 7 swing states, it seems like Kennedy hurts Trump in like 6 of them. Again, in Nevada, Kennedy hurts Trump by a net 1 percentage point. And so you can see my point being proven. So as you guys can tell, it seems like Kennedy dropping out is in the foreseeable future, and this would totally help Trump's odds, I would say, by about 15 to 20 percentage points. Not actually popular vote-wise. What I'm saying is that the odds of him winning. So out of 100% odds of Trump winning, I right now have him at like a 60-40 odds of winning. If Kennedy drops out and endorses Trump, obviously that goes up by about 15 percentage points. Not because Kennedy is leading the polls by any crazy amount, but because that 5% support base he has, if Trump nets 1% of the popular vote for that, it's an immense difference in all the swing states. Again, like I said, you add 1% to Donald Trump in 2020 in all the swing states, Trump actually wins the election. So for that reason alone, I think that Kennedy dropping out would be a great thing. And so look forward to that in the foreseeable future. If not, then you can come back and make fun of me in the comments. Until then, like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. I'll see y'all in the next one. Adios.